conversation specifically about God's existence in terms of the necessary mind argument, because you had said something about how you have something responding to that conversation or whatever, where people try to bring up that argument.
Yeah. Well, it's more about how like it grounds logic or whatever,
Okay.
or like truth claims or whatever.
So I have an argument that I want to bring you. This is known in philosophical circles as the Augustinian proof. This is something that St. Augustine used as his argument. It's the argument for divine conceptualism. And so I wanted to try to bring this to you. And it's a syllogism with proper inference and all that kind of stuff. And you can just tell me if you have an issue with any of them, and we'll just talk from there. Okay?
Yeah, sure.
Cool. So the first thing that I have is premise 1 is that truths are propositions that correspond to reality. Are you a correspondence theorist?
I think so. I've read 0 philosophy books, but that makes the most sense to me from what I've heard other people say. So
yeah, correspondence theory is usually the main one that most people hold to. That's why I was curious. I didn't know if maybe you were like a Bayesian probabilist or something like that. So I just wanted to see.
Yeah, well, I'm a massive Bayesian, but I've never really regarded that as a competing idea to the idea that truth is that which corresponds to reality.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that would just be my definitional premise. So it would simply just be that truths are propositions that correspond to reality.
Sure.
Okay. Premise 2 is that propositions are inherently mind dependent because they exist as contents of thought. And that's my ontological premise. Conclusion 1 is that therefore, right, truths are mind dependent. It's modus ponens. Okay. Premise 3 is that there exists necessary truths, like the law of non-contradiction. Premise 4 is that contingent minds cannot ground necessary truth for their existence. And conclusion 1 to that is that necessary truths require a necessarily existing mind to exist.
Necessary truths require a necessary mind to exist.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then final conclusion is that therefore there exists in a necessary mind that grounds necessary truths. The standard theistic argument doesn't necessitate a specific God yet at all. That's my entire thing that I bring to you.
Can you tell me conclusion 3 again?
Like the final one?
Yeah, therefore a necessary mind.
Yeah, therefore there exists a necessary mind that grounds all necessary truths.
Okay. We'll probably just like go through each of these things individually, I guess. But weirdly, I kind of feel like starting at the end there. So, do you know who Darth Dawkins is?
Yeah.
Are you a fan of him?
No.
Okay, me neither. But
no, first off, he's ridiculously rude. Like I can't stand his charitability at all. It's so bad. I don't like him. I don't like the way he does things at all.
So when he, among the many things I hate about him is just how much of a coward he is. So what I never see him do is what you're going to do here, which is basically defend like your claim. You know, he just says, well, you can't do blank XYZ. So when people ask him, how do you affirm the belief in your God, or what validates that? He says it's self-authenticating. So this.
I don't believe in self-evident truths, because I'm not a foundationalist. I think Darth Dawkins is.
He said they're self-authenticating.
Sounds like a tautology to that, doesn't it?
Well, like when I read your conclusion number 3 here, therefore a necessary mind grounds all necessary truths, then doesn't the necessary mind have to be self-authenticating then?
Well, I mean, if there is a necessary mind that provides necessary truths, then it would be the thing that grounds those propositions in the first place.
Yeah, so like it proves itself or whatever.
I don't really know. I think that it would have to be basically the baseline for all proof in general. So I don't know if you'd call it. I don't like the term self-authenticating. I think that's kind of I don't think that really works well with, like, I guess the type of argument that I'm giving, if that makes sense. Because like my thing is based in basically using human psychology on top of just the philosophical grounding in any way, shape, or form for truth and propositions in general, right?
Sure.
And so I have it kind of labeled like this. I have formal logic. I don't know if you do formal logic, but
no.
So would you say that this is a logically sound argument, or that it's logically sound, or but then it's just unsound compared to your paradigm?
No, it probably follows. Like it's probably valid. The soundness of it. That's then where we have to talk about. Okay, are these premises actually true or whatever? Like it's probably valid. Like I don't have formal training and in logic, reading the syllogisms and being able to be like, boom, yeah, right there, there's your problem.
Yeah.
But like I can just grant that actually for the sake of it. So we'll go up to the top. Truths are propositions that correspond with reality. So I don't really even disagree about that, but we have to talk about, I guess, what that means. I think that truth is a property that propositions have. Well, they might have. I could say something false.
I'll give you that. I call it a characteristic. I'm Aristotelian, so like I'll call it a characteristic. But it's pretty. If you want to use property, that's fine too. I think they're pretty much the same.
Who do you know the big? It wasn't I wasn't. I can't. I always forget. But there's this big philosophy of language, either at the end of the 1800s or early 1900s. But it's that language has to have a referent in order for it to, like, that's fundamentally how language works. Have you heard of that before?
It's standard linguistic philosophy.
So when I say truths are, like, so you say truths are propositions that correspond with reality. Okay, true is just like, there isn't such a thing as the truth out there. Like, we can't get rid of the rest of the universe, but then the truth still remains. It's nebulous, it's conceptual, whatever. So true really only makes any sense. And I agree that truth corresponds with reality, but that word really only makes any sense if it's in reference to something. So like Chomsky's sentence, colorless green ideas sleep furiously, is like, it's almost like, yes, it's false, but it's also completely nonsensical, right? So that's just kind of my opinion, my view of how I approach truth and treat it.
But you do, I mean, like, because I can level with you on that to a degree, right? I could say, like, for example, you wouldn't, or I'll just ask you actually, you wouldn't say that if a proposition is not made, then there is no truth declared?
If a proposition is not made, then there is no truth declared? I would say so, because I just think that is a performative thing that we do. So there would also be no soccer if we didn't exist. There would be no art.
Yeah, but I mean, like, that would be kind of different though, because that would be something more, that would be considered a contingent truth, right? Something that would be grounded in contingent being, something that's created by us, right? So like, if we would be able to ground the existence of, for example, how to play soccer as a proposition, because soccer is something that's created, right? It's completely created.
So you're claiming that truth is not contingent?
I say that there is contingent. I'm not like a necessitarian. There's contingent truths, and then there are necessary truths. Truths that are absent of a human mind making that proposition.
Yeah, I think in the debate you probably remembered me saying things like, there are truths that are conditional.
Yeah,
they only become true at certain points. But what about the absolute truth, something that's true literally forever? Now,
yes.
You're going to argue that the necessary mind is the only thing that is that, I would say?
Well, so because of the fact that a truth would be something that's grounded in a mind in the first place, right? Because that's a proposition made by that mind, that if there's a contingent mind that makes it, then they would make contingent truths. So then if you agree, basically it's kind of like a flow, is that if you agree that there is a such thing as a necessary truth, then there must be some form of necessary mind that grounds said truth. Because a contingent mind can't literally be the existence of something, a contingent mind cannot be the grounding for the existence of something necessary. That's just kind of modally nonsense to say.
Sure. So then premise 2 here, the propositions are mind dependent. Truths are, why did I write that? So truths are propositions that correspond with reality. Propositions are inherently, okay. So yeah, I was going to say I disagree with that, but I actually don't. Propositions are mind dependent. So I wouldn't necessarily say that I feel like that's 100% true, because of that, like, linguistic thing I was talking about. If there's nothing to reference, then I get it that I think only minds create propositions, but propositions without minds, that makes zero sense to me, because
that's why they'd be mind dependent, right?
What's that?
That's why they'd be mind dependent. The proposition.
No, because I'm not sure. So the proposition being mind dependent, it's kind of it's odd because if your proposition doesn't reference anything, if your mind is the only thing that exists, then on what grounds can you possibly say that your mind is producing true or false propositions or claims?
When you said if your mind is the only thing that exists, are you referring back to your argument that you had made against Jim Bob earlier? Like where you have the
Basically, the 2
hypothetical...
+ 2 = 4, 2 + 2 = 5 kind of thing.
But if we, just for the sake of the argument though, if you were to grant that there's a possible world where God is the only thing that exists and that basically the only thing that is referable is the contents of God's mind, that still would apply here, because then if the contents of God's mind still have, for example, the laws of logic, mathematics, and these types of things that cannot change based off of human proposition, then therefore they would still exist. They would just exist in abstracta rather than being concrete.
Well, the problem with that, and this pretty much gets to the totality of all of this for me, I guess. Contingent minds can... Yeah, so the rest of this doesn't really matter because of this part here for me. So we'll just kind of skip right to that. So when I made that argument or hypothetical or whatever, pretend that God's mind is the only thing that exists, right? And now you're saying that that mind, even though it's the only thing that exists, and so it cannot make external references. It's like God could say apples are oranges, and that would all of a sudden somehow be true or whatever.
Yeah, so that truth, right, that would be a contingent truth if that was something that, for example, a human invented, right, in terms of, but at the same time, if we're granting that the law of identity is a thing, right, then if I say that apples are not oranges, that could still exist in God's mind prior to human beings making that proposition, right?
So the problem with this is you're not granting that God's mind is the only thing that exists. You're granting that logic has to coexist with God's mind.
Yes, I believe that is a concept that is in God's mind. That's why my entire argument is based off of truths or propositions that are necessary in order. They're not considered contingent, right? So like the laws of logic, for me personally, obviously, I would say that it's nonsensical to say that the laws of logic are a contingent truth, right? I don't know if you would agree with me.
That essentially is how I feel, because I think logic is just basically purely grammatical, because logic describes valid grammatical descriptions of things that we experience.
Yeah, but that doesn't really make much sense though, because logic in of itself is basically metaphysics, because logic, you have to use logic, for example, to form grammar in the first place. In order to form grammatical sentences and all these types of things, there has to be some form of identity that exists in order to refer to something, for example, right? So like it wouldn't just be linguistics, because you have to use logic to make linguistics even happen.
So I'm not 100% sure how to respond to this. I'm thinking something like, well, logic is just a property contained within the grammar, but I don't think that necessarily makes it a separate thing that language is borrowing from. And I can't really think of a way to translate this to mathematics, but I don't think there are properties within mathematics. I mean, you could kind of say multiplication and division, but those are different styles of mathematics, but it's actually just complete. It's just mathematics. It's not something else that you pull from. I don't think mathematics borrows something else to make math work. Math just has like the rules or whatever that it has, and that just is. And that is essentially my view about the relationship between logic and language. And then what it's doing as a tool is giving us the tools, like it is the tool we use to describe things and like couch what we see in terms of, well, the only thing we can do is express things linguistically.
Well, wouldn't you say though that you have to presuppose the laws of logic in the first place in order to basically apply some form of value to a number?
No, because I'm not to do that would be committed to the idea that the laws of logic are some separately existing thing, and then I take them in, and then I start describing things. The laws of logic Like literally before we formalized this, people were still going around understanding things about their environment, like
Yeah.
fire is hot or whatever. So it wasn't formalized first. And to me, that just tells me that, yes, logic is just part of, I guess, I don't know how to really say it in
Well,
a
wouldn't you
way
say the
other
laws of
than,
logic are discovered? Because like I would say it like because you said that like people were using it right prior to making the actual proposition themselves. Wouldn't that kind
yeah,
of help my case? Because they're still
not,
utilizing those core principles to actually form identity.
I wouldn't really say so because I would just say it's sort of intrinsic in there. Like in mathematics, we discover new theorems all the time. We discover new prime numbers all the time.
Yeah.
But we didn't actually, like the math didn't make the prime number. It's just like all of mathematics just simply contains that. And then eventually, like with the prime numbers, you just have to have sufficient computing power to like find it. But you didn't like do something other than mathematics to do that. And with logic, you're not doing something other than language when you apply logic to language. It's to me, it's just purely grammatical. And language, like you can't. And I said this in the debate. You can't, like if I make a grammatical error or whatever, there's no way for me to like prove, disprove, or whatever that hey, this structure of this sentence is false, other than just appealing to grammar because that's the rules for how it works.
Yeah, but you'd say though that that a grammatical or a sentence or a grammatical error is something that then utilizes logic, though, right? Because if something is grammatically incorrect, that means that there's a correct way to do something.
Yeah, but that's expressible only in linguistic grammatical terms. Logic is just one of, like, past tense is a grammatical term, or I don't know if that's grammar. Yeah, that's grammatical.
I think so.
I think logic is grammatical. That's just how I think about it.
Okay. I mean, I would honestly say, like, because if you think that logic is simply just something that's grammatical, wouldn't you say that even, like, let's do a hypothetical where we're cavemen, right? We don't speak anything except for ooga booga,
Yeah.
right? Wouldn't you say that they could still use logic to deduce certain things?
Yeah, so this is super interesting. I think that animals without language and us before language, like we had to have been doing that because animals take in information from the environment, and then they're able to understand it somehow. So they're doing logic. And this is really hard to explain, but it's really fascinating. So they're doing some kind of logic. They're like a cat knows how far to jump in order to like pounce on an animal correctly, but a cat can't do math and it doesn't understand physics. But it somehow has a relationship with that and knows it in a sense, right? It's just kind of something that its brain does. And so for
Like
us, we were doing that and then we formalized it. And to me, that's what language is.
But then in that case, though, like if you admit that like they were utilizing things like that prior to formalizing it, then it wouldn't be a grammatical thing. Logic can't be grammatical in that case because logic can be used prior to grammar.
So I think that, have you ever heard the term mentalese?
Mm-mm.
So it's just the idea that like we can't actually demonstrate or show or prove the form in which our thoughts take. Like I speak in sentences. It's really not possible to demonstrate that I think in sentences, but I think exactly the way I use language. So the thinking part is there before language, and now this is just my formalization of how I was doing that. So the logic I think is there. It's just sort of, and this is the funny thing. It is sort of non-linguistic or proto-linguistic before, because the animals have it, the cavemen were doing it, and then we started using language to describe it. But I think you could just, and this does sound a little cop-outy from my part, but I would just say that there is a language of how we think, and like this is an actual term, the mentalese. So the psychologists that study the brain, that's how they talk about it.
But if we were to have like a hypothetical where there, for example, is no creatures, right? You wouldn't say that the principles of logic exist. If the Earth was just the Earth and there was no creatures on the planet, in general, you'd say that the principles of logic just don't apply now.
Are you saying that nothing exists, or just sentient beings?
Just things that
do,
use logic. No creatures use logic.
Sure. So there are no sentient beings, but like a universe with physical things still exists.
Yeah, like it's just an empty earth.
And so you're asking me if the principle of logic still exists? Because it's grammatical, I would say no. Because what we're doing when we do that is it goes back to the referencing thing. When I make logical statements, they're always in reference to something.
Well, if they're always in reference to something, because like I kind of get where you're coming from when you're talking about like how it would still be grammatical, but the fact though that it can be used right without applying direct grammar to it in the first place, that kind of points more towards there being some, I guess, maybe not a linguistic proposition, but maybe like an intuitive proposition, I guess some people call that, where it's like they don't actually make a formal argument for something, but they know that something is the case. And if something like
Sure.
that, but if something like that was a thing, like the laws of logic, for example, or maybe just like the principle, not even just like numbers, but like I'm not a Platonist, but like
Me neither.
I don't like mathematical Platonism at all. But like the principle of mathematics in the first place, right? The fact that it can be used and the fact that it does point towards things, because you'd say that like if the numbers add up, then like that thing would be objectively the case, right?
Well, yeah, according to mathematics, which I think we invented.
Yeah, but you'd say that that directly corresponds to reality, though, if the numbers add up to, for example, a truth. Like if, for example, the speed of light, right?
Oh, sure. Like we can use numbers to assign a value to the speed of light.
Yeah.
Yes. And so you're asking me if the
principle
if the
of
value
math.
number of the speed of light is true.
Not exactly. I'm saying that because of the fact that you can utilize the principle of mathematics in the first place to almost perfectly, depending on, obviously, we're not perfect, obviously, but almost perfectly correspond things to reality.
Yeah,
right? If we have the ability
unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics, or whatever that paper is called.
Yeah, and so if we have the ability to do that properly, then that means that whatever that concept is, or that principle, the initial principle, in some way, shape, or form, would have to be something that can't be grounded in a contingent mind, because that principle in of itself is something that is it's not a contingent truth, right? The principle to be able to do mathematics is not a contingent truth, because if it was a contingent truth, technically speaking, any human being on the planet could make up their own formula and make their own system, right? But that's not something that's incoherent to say.
You're saying it is incoherent to say that?
It's incoherent to say that if mathematics, for example, was a contingent truth, or the principle of mathematics was a contingent truth, that then therefore, like if you were to say it's contingent, that would make it to where I can make up my own math. That has nothing to do with your math in any way.
But it is contingent on God's mind, so God can do this.
It's contingent on God's mind. That's what makes it necessary. That's the problem.
But I thought you said, but I thought you were just trying to say there, if mathematics, the principles of. Yeah.
No, you're good. No, you're good. No problem.
But I thought you were saying if the principles of mathematics are grounded in something contingent, then that's a problem. I thought you said.
Because the ground, like, so when I say grounding, right, I'm saying that the existence of something arising from, right? So like if a contingent being makes a contingent proposition that declares a contingent truth. Okay. If you say that mathematics is a contingent truth, then that means that it arises from contingent beings. But mathematics as a principle doesn't arise from contingent beings.
But God creates contingent things.
He creates contingent things.
So if you say something is contingent, that doesn't mean it comes from something contingent.
Well, even if God creates contingent things, that's actually one of the most common arguments for God is necessity and contingency. Is that if there's an infinite number of contingent things, then there has to, in some way, shape, or form, be something necessary, only because of the fact that all of these things that are contingent have the ability to not exist, right? So like the law of excluded middle, the law of identity, all these kind of things, if they're contingent truths, they technically couldn't exist. They have the ability to not exist, even if there's human beings on the planet.
I guess I'm just really confused. If you're going to say there are contingent,
it has the ability to not exist.
Yeah, but if you're going to say that mathematics can't, if mathematics is contingent, that means it came from something contingent. Do you think mathematics is necessary?
I believe that it points to a necessary being because of the fact that
Okay,
so no, no, I'm saying that mathematics is not contingent. I'm saying mathematics as a principle is a necessary like a transcendental category.
there can't be more than one necessary thing.
Well, it would be something within God's mind. So it's not like it's a different being from God.
Well,
There would be
now we're
there would be
back to
one
this
necessary
thing
being.
earlier where I was like, wait a minute, but like a necessary being has to be singular. But earlier you said, well, no, but God also has the laws of logic, and now all of a sudden God also has mathematics. I just I don't see
Well,
how
because
you
these are
don't have
because
more
these are
than one
concepts.
necessary thing here, which I think that's like I'm a philosophical idiot, but I think that's a kind of a problem.
Well, do you want me to explain it from a Aristotelian perspective, like the way that they
It
kind of
may
do it?
go over my head,
Yeah.
but
So
yeah.
like the way that kind of works, right, is that at least the way that Aristotle put that is that things that are like the contents of something's mind, right? Like whether it just let's say human beings, right? It can take from things that are, for example, contingent. It can take from other contingent beings and then agree, and then boom, now you and I have a consensus. But it doesn't mean that it's necessary by itself, right? And so with God, there is this thing, this principle called res, and it's just the thing. It's the being itself.
Okay.
And so that's basically the overall totality of a being. You're a res, I'm a res. It's just a Latin term. And the when you say that there, for example, that there are necessary truths that exist that are within God's mind, that's not distinct from the res itself of God. So then, therefore, there wouldn't be multiple necessaries, right? Because I would grant you that if logic and mathematics as principles existed next to God and then God just pulls them, that would be different. But because of the fact that it's technically speaking, in a sense, materially identical to like God's mind, in a sense, where we'd say that it's grounded in His mind. It's a contents of the necessary mind. Then the things that arise from that necessary mind would then therefore go to necessary truths that then we pull from as contingent beings. If that.
So I don't remember if I asked you this earlier. I thought I did, and now I don't remember what you said. So there can be more than one necessary truth, but
Yes.
there cannot be more than one necessary being.
If you're talking about it in terms of like a proposition or something like that, absolutely. But if we're talking about like we would say that though that truth as a manifestation or the overall being of truth is the second person of the Godhead, Jesus Christ, right? Because he claims that himself that he is the truth, and that's actually something that we say. That's actually a joke that we say all the time, like, oh, what is truth to you? Because to me, truth is a person. Right. So what is truth to you? And
Jim Bob did that during the debate. Remember when I said, well, if God is truth, then I can just say God for every for every answer. And then
yeah, but that also gets into referent things, right? Because
Yeah.
like if we're talking about the contents of God's mind, as in showing truths that come from God's mind, that doesn't mean that then therefore, like for example, the laws of logic are then identical to God, because we're talking about the contents of God's mind, not literally God's mind itself. Right, there's a difference. Like, have you ever heard the statement? Have you ever heard I don't know, because like you know how there's a bunch of theories of knowledge, right? Like you're a JTB guy,
Yeah.
right? So there's some people that hold that knowledge is a knower knowing what is known. I know it's kind of weird, but there are some people that say things like that, right? So then therefore there would be a distinction between the knower, the act of knowing, so like the actual process of knowing something, and then the content of what is known by the knower, and so those would be distinct from each other.
Okay. I would. It sounds like a tiny bit like a subject change. I want to. So, is there a supposed limit to the number of necessary truths?
I would say that like there's possibly plenty of necessary truths that we don't know, only because they've never been revealed.
So, couldn't it be infinity?
The amount of truths?
The amount of necessary truths.
Sure. Yeah, the amount of necessary propositions that then lead to a necessary truth, that could be infinite. Yes.
So I'm gonna couch this kind of as like two questions. So if possibly there are infinite number of necessary truths, well then there aren't any contingent ones that could lead to that possibility. And then
I would just say that there would
Alex,
be two different categories, right? So, like, even if I say there could be an infinite amount of necessary truths, that doesn't necessitate that then therefore there still are contingent truths. That doesn't really follow.
well, I don't know if somebody more brilliant
We
than me
we
was
we
here.
specifically
There
make
are different
categories.
sets of infinity,
Yep.
and there's this whole thing about like cardinality with infinity, and there are different degrees of infinity, and I actually don't remember particularly how to argue that, but it does
Infinite
seem
sets, like what Godel, I think, was he one of the people that did infinite sets or whatever, where you can have two different sets of infinity that declare, like, for example, there is a set of infinity, right, in set theory, where you'd say that 0 to infinity, right?
yeah.
But then there's also another set of infinity where you could say 0 to negative infinity, and then therefore that would be two different sets of infinity.
Yeah, there's something like that, and again, it has to do with they're called alepphs and cardinality, and I don't remember enough about it to make an argument about it here, but it seems kind of like a problem to juxtapose an infinite number of necessary truths with also there being room for contingent truths. It's like if one is infinite, then how are you possibly giving yourself room for anything else? We'll have to just go past that because I don't really know what's up. But Alex O'Connor, I've heard him say, and probably other people have said this too. I don't know if you've ever heard him say it, but he's like, "Well, look, I really genuinely don't understand how a necessary being can produce anything other than necessary truths or facts or whatever. So then there can't be any contingent things. Like the way I kind of argue it. Have you ever heard that the argument? I don't know if it's even a good argument, but the idea that God can't exist because if God is perfect, then he can only do perfect things. And God willing for there to be a universe which is necessarily not as maximally great as him would be God doing an imperfect thing. So therefore, God just is a contradiction and doesn't exist.
Yeah, I mean, the way that that's usually addressed, like in our view, is that we would just like I would honestly just say that that's not like really a justified argument to say that God has to basically make something equal to him, right? Because like if you were to say if God decided to create something in the first place, they are automatically less because God is uncreated. So if God creates anything, they are ontologically inferior just by that principle.
Yeah, but it almost actually kind of seems like God is doing something almost equivalent to sinning, doing something that is less than perfect. Because creating an
Well,
imperfect
his
universe,
action of creating something, right? So if the act of creation by itself is a perfect thing, the act of creation itself, there's a difference between the contents of what arises from it versus the act. Because like so I'm Orthodox, so I affirm this thing called the essence energies distinction. We talk about this all the time. Is that there's these things called the operations of God or the actions of God, which are called as energies. And so the act that's actually grounded in him inherently, that act by itself is completely perfect because it is materially identical still to his essence. But with his will, because we believe God has free will. This is one of the reasons why we don't follow necessitarianism. There's some like Thomists that do that. And I think that's absolutely abysmal. But that's just because I think necessitarianism is crazy because that brings so many problems to the natural world. In my opinion, if you just say that like absolutely everything is necessary, then like a woman being raped, for example, that's necessary. Like that's crazy to like hold to, right? If you had something like that, it had to happen.
It's part of God. Like it's part of God's plan for the universe. Like that was always going to happen, and he knew it was going to happen, and he's the reason that those dominoes fell the way they did.
That's the difference, though, is that like in our view, right? If God knows that something is going to happen, that doesn't mean that then therefore he's the cause for that. He wouldn't be a cause, because an action of another, because we believe that we were given free will, is that if he creates things with free will in the first place, then if he knows obviously that we are going to use our free will in a negative manner, that doesn't mean that then therefore his act of creation by itself is now imperfect, because he has a specific plan, of course, to basically completely rid the world of anything that could possibly be negative in that case in the future, because he knew that he was going to create Adam and Eve. He knew what was going to happen to them because of the fact that they are created and they have a limited mind, because God does not create another God. We do. I will literally concede to you right now that when I say omniscience and omnipotence and things like that, omnipotence is not literally anything at all that could possibly be talked about. It's within his nature. So things that are so I say all the time, God is the God of logic, right? So like he does things in that format, and so but he doesn't have passions, he doesn't have emotions and things like this when he actually is properly doing anything. So he doesn't create things with the regard of, oh well, I'm not going to create this person because they're going to suffer, right? Like because to it, I mean, in our view, of course, like I know that's probably not your view, and it probably sounds weird coming from me, but that's kind of how these worldview comparison things work.
I mean, it doesn't even sound biblical. Like,
which one? Like the emotions thing?
Yeah, because God, like, pretty explicitly instructs the Israelites to do certain things because it pleases Him.
Well, so saying like pleases and like even there's even some sections where like God uses languages like in like a hate manner, right? Like all of these different types of things, these are anthropomorphic. So like the people, like there's different types of people that interpret the Bible, but because I'm Orthodox, I ground my stuff kind of more in like the church fathers and the ecumenical councils and things like that. And the way that the original Christians believe this kind of stuff, I totally just lost my point because I almost choked on my spit. I don't remember. What was I saying?
I brought up the point that you're saying God is emotionally disconnected from what He does. But I said, if you read the Bible, He literally tells Israelites to do things because it pleases Him.
Okay, so here's the thing. If God decides to do something or tell the Israelites to do something, if it pleases Him, right, because of the fact that they followed that said thing, that doesn't mean that then the command that was given is based off of an emotion in any sense. Because He's telling him to do that based off of possibly the ultimate plan in general.
I don't see how you get there from that.
Well, because if He commands something because it's due to the plan that is then going to be exercised, God then can therefore say that He is happy because of the fact that the human beings are following these commands. That doesn't mean that then therefore the command was emotion driven.
I mean, it's like you're saying that because God's pleasure comes later, then that's not part of the process. But I really don't agree with you on that. Like, I can't say, it would please me if you did this, and then they did. Oh, there, God invoked emotion. But if you do this, it will please me. Somehow, God's emotions are not primary.
Well, we also have a different view of emotion.
I totally
right?
don't like.
We also have a different view, like in general, of like emotion, because like we wouldn't say that God has emotions, right? Because we would say that the way that He is and the way that He possesses knowledge and all these kind of things. There's no way. There's literally no way for God to basically actually like ontologically become emotional, because if He knows everything whatsoever, then He also knows every possible outcome for everything that could ever happen in general. So he wouldn't be expressing some form of emotion towards these things like we would, because we get emotional usually because of either learning something that we didn't want to know.
Sounds like God's a trauma surgeon. Like, how can you, or like a vet that has to put down puppies all day. How can you do that? Well, you get used to it.
Hey, Jesus is known in our church as the great physician. That's what we call Him all the time. So,
what does that even mean?
Because He's the one who heals us of our sickness. We call the church the hospital.
Okay, sure.
Right, so like those kind of things.
So we were like, this train of thought that we're currently on kind of began with talking about like something about, like you said, like if God does an action, then it's good, or something, or like all of God's actions are good or whatever.
The action in of itself.
Yes. So like, even if the action has like bad results or something like that, the action itself was good or whatever. So this is pretty confusing to me, because I think if you want to evaluate the goodness or badness of something, it has to stand in causal relationship to something, right? Like, why was it bad when so-and-so died? Well, because of all the people that grieved for it, and because of they left behind children that now can't be supported or whatever. So there has to be like a causal relationship. So, and this went to creation. So God created the world knowing that horrible things would happen, but the creation is still perfect. So
the act of creating is perfect.
How is it perfect? Because to me, in order for it to be perfect, there has to be a kind of like, because that's like a moral claim, I feel like. So there has to be a causal relationship in the creation. So why was it perfect? merely because, well, if God does it, it is perfect, and the things that are a consequence of it are somehow not part of it?
Well, so I'll address this, and then I kind of want to just get back to like the actual syllogism, because we're kind of like on a whole
Yeah,
other thing.
there's basically pretty much just this one last thing.
Yeah, okay, that's cool.
About that.
So regarding the act, right? Even if God decided to create something, that the act in of itself is good, it's perfect. If there, for example, if he creates beings, because with that intention of them, oh wow, look at that. If there is, for example, contingent beings that arise from this perfect action, and they are going to basically cause other things within that, then therefore the actual cause of everything would still be perfect, because there's internal causes of like, because we believe that we're causal agents. We believe that basically human beings have the agency to basically manipulate the world around them if they so choose.
But why is the creation perfect?
The act of creating is perfect. I didn't say the creation was perfect.
So, yeah, you're right, and that's just a mistake on my part. Why is the act of creation perfect?
Because anything that God does, right? Because like obviously this is kind of get into like an epistemic thing, right? Because we believe that at a base level that God himself, in of himself, is perfect, and if he in of himself is perfect, the only outcome that can actually come from God would be perfect actions. Because if he does something imperfect, then obviously that would show that there's something in his nature that then therefore is flawed.
How can God go about doing something imperfect?
I don't think he can.
Well, then this is I just think that this is actually meaningless.
That's why I'm saying it's more of a. That's why I'm saying it's like an
thing that God could possibly do is perfect. Then it's just me. It doesn't matter what he does; it's perfect. So God could rain down manna from heaven or kill everybody, and both of those things are like God could literally command. Like if you believe in objective morality, it's always wrong to do blank. But then if God does it, it's not wrong. And it's like, then it's not objective. It just literally can't be.
I mean, a lot of like the whole like actions where like God will basically have like a certain moral set. Well, God doesn't have a moral set. That's a bad word. But if God basically demonstrates who he is, whether or not that you and I, for example, think that that's incorrect, or whether or not that, like maybe, I don't know, God did something that in the Bible, for example, like in the Old Testament, plenty of that, right? Plenty of things that God commands that a lot of people look at and go, ooh, that's okay, I got to think about that. You know what I mean? Like there's plenty of that. There's a lot of people that are not Christian just on the foundation of reading the book of Leviticus.
That's pretty bad.
Things like that happen. So, but that's the thing though, is that God would still be, technically speaking, the objective moral standard, because we are simply just judging that standard from our own understanding and not understanding the one who is all-knowing. So like even if something happens,
I don't think there's any understanding there. It's just a claim. It's either just by definition we say God is, or God authoritatively declares that he is. And so there is no reason.
Well, it's not really that he declares that he's good. It's more just kind of based off of the entire, like, because this kind of gets like really deep into like the Christian paradigm in terms of like what we think the world is, because we think that the world is a flawed world because of the fact that Adam and Eve fell, and so that's why everything happens. That's why entropy happens. That's why decay happens. That's why all these things happen, because Adam introduced death into the world. Death was, in our view, death was not a natural thing that actually occurs. It's something that was invoked by Adam.
Yeah, but that just can't possibly be true because they ate plants, which are living organisms.
Well, that's kind of a different conversation, of course. But like, you know, I'm just telling you.
I think you just have to do special pleading and say that they don't. That's not a. They're not alive. You have to either say plants aren't alive biblically, which means nothing other than something I have to say in order to preserve the claim that there was no death before the fall, or something else.
Well, I mean, in our view, right, like death is the separation of soul and body. That's the reason. That's what we think death is. So when a plant dies, we don't really think that that's like a literal, like actual death.
Right. So when a human dies, they don't die because their soul lives for eternity.
Well, no. So like the death is not like ceasing to exist in our view. Death in our view is simply our soul separating from our body at a point in time, and then our soul goes to where it's now going to go, and our body rots in the ground. That's the reason why our body rots in the ground, is because of the fact that our soul leaves our body and it starts decaying, decomposing, all these types of things. So like that's why I'm saying we have different views on that, of course, but we don't believe that plants have souls. So I mean,
Yeah,
like
neither do I.
they don't die technically. In our view.
Man, there's so many things.
Hey, we could try to schedule something to talk about.
This is a little bit of a tangent, but it's continuous with what we're talking about here. When we had that conversation back there, you said Judaism just doesn't even exist, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
God created a covenant with them.
Mm-hmm.
What was that covenant? Wasn't it a religion?
Well, I mean, so we believe that religion, right, that's specifically talked about in the Old Testament is the coming of Christ Himself. So all of these, I actually make. But God never told.
So, like, kind of where I'm getting with this is, it really sounds like God lied to all the Jews before Christ.
Why is that?
He never revealed Christ to them.
He did.
Abraham knew Jesus existed.
Want me to show you?
Are you going to say before Abraham I am?
No, I'm gonna link it with something though. So there's a difference. So this is in Exodus. This is God speaking to Moses.
Isn't that the ego, Amy? Well, this is Old Testament, so it would be Hebrew.
Yeah, it would be Yahweh.
Yeah, ego. Well, it wouldn't be. So the Hebrew and the Greek are different.
Yes.
And so you're just referencing because Jesus said that therefore.
Well, no.
But nobody knew Jesus existed yet because he wasn't.
Well, so then that gets more into like deep theology then, because like we can see multiple different verses, like for example, in Judges, like when he says that God actually sat next to, Gideon. There's a section specifically where God sits down next to Gideon, and then he says Yahweh turns His face towards Gideon, right? But then the Bible also in the same book will literally say something like nobody can see God and live. And so in these different sections, right?
There are contradictions in the Bible.
Well, we don't believe that that's obviously a contradiction. That's rather referring to the harmonization of how God reveals Himself in the first place. Because like we believe in like essence energy distinction like that. We don't know anything about God's essence. We say that straight up. It's called apophatic theology. We only know what God does, not what He is in Himself.
So you said you were going to link that. You're linking it to when Jesus said,
"I am that I am."
Okay, but Abraham didn't have access to the New Testament, so Jesus was not revealed to Abraham.
No, this is the point, though, is that Abraham, when he met with this is Moses. My bad.
Well, it doesn't matter. Anybody in the Old Testament, Daniel, Moses, Eve, none of them ever met Jesus, so Jesus is not revealed to them.
Let me pull up something real quick here for you. So that's the thing, though, is that we believe that the people in the Old Testament saw Jesus when they met God, right? That's the entire point. Is it right here?
So when they don't you believe that all the souls are resting, awaiting judgment?
People that are dead?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they haven't met God yet.
They have. There's actually
the souls are awaiting judgment.
There's two judgments. There's an initial judgment upon death, and then there's the final judgment when all men resurrect.
So you're claiming that, okay, this is super wild to me. So
you can just ask me questions about it if you want. I don't care.
Do you think non-Christians can go to heaven?
Through the grace of God, yes. Only in certain circumstances, of course.
But if when we die, we all get to meet God, then you're just going to know that Jesus, you're just going to be like, oh, shit, who's that? My only begotten son? Oh, okay. I'm a Christian, I go to heaven now.
So that's actually interesting that you said that. There's a specific verse in the New Testament. It's in 2 Peter. I think it's in 2 Peter, where we believe this thing called Christus Victor. This is how the atonement works in Orthodoxy, where after Jesus died, He descended into hell for 3 days. And it says that He preached to those that were in hell, because there were many people that were awaiting the coming of Jesus, right? The people prior to Him. They knew of Him, but they were not able to obviously go to heaven yet because of the fact that they were not atoned for their sins yet. So they waited in what it's called Abraham's bosom, which was basically a waiting place of peace. It's what it says Lazarus was in.
Sounds like purgatory.
Kind of.
But they were in hell, so Jesus took people out of hell? He rescued people from hell?
Yes. He preached to everyone.
I didn't think that was possible.
He preached to every single person that was in hell prior to Jesus coming.
Was Moses in hell?
He was in Abraham's bosom, which is so. Technically speaking, hell. There's different terminologies for hell. There's Hades, which Hades specifically is basically there's two categories. There's Abraham's bosom, and then there's hell. And hell is basically just a place of kind of like a darkness where it's like you don't like you basically have given up and you just don't have anything left. And then Abraham's bosom is the people that had faith in God in the Old Testament and all these types of things. And when Christ came down, he defeated what we said we defeated death by death, where death in of itself was defeated, which is the thing that the devil introduced.
Okay.
For us to be able to basically no longer die, which is why he went down into hell afterwards and preached to everybody in there. There's actually a lot of Orthodox Christians that'll say that a lot of the pre-Christian philosophers were I actually have an icon in my house that's called the pre-Christian philosophers icon, where it basically shows St. Paul standing next to Aristotle and Plato and Pythagoras and all these guys, because they were the first people that as soon as Christ came down and preached to these people who were in hell because they didn't preach for God, they were more deists, that they came to, they're like, it's you're the one I was talking about this entire time. And then they would go with him and he defeated death. He took the keys of hell is what it says specifically.
So let's say I die 5 seconds from now. I'm obviously an atheist. Am I going to go to hell?
You probably would be in the second category of Hades. So you'd be someone who is in that darkness. But that doesn't mean that then therefore right. So there's
is
people,
that a yes or a no? I have no idea.
I would say that it's a little bit more complicated than that. Like I wouldn't say that it's just a dichotomy, because you have to remember, right, that salvation is something that it has. Salvation applies in this current world that we're a part of right now, and then it also applies because in our view we also believe in this thing called toll houses, which is basically where everybody has the opportunity to attempt to go, whether or not you are in Christ.
Sure.
And it's basically ascending for 40 days into the air, basically, like in like a spiritual way, not like literally. But there's these things called toll houses, which are basically demons that are within that, and they accuse you of things. And if you're not somebody that is personally yourself in Christ, you're not somebody who has accepted him into your heart, then you will not be able to basically look at those demons and be like, I don't care. I have, it's like I've been atoned for my sin, because you don't, right? Because you're somebody who would be rejecting that. So you wouldn't be somebody that would be capable of ascending. That's one of the reasons why we have that necessity, or why you need Christ, because Christ will not vouch for you in a way. He won't vouch for you because you're somebody who rejects him. Why would he vouch for you if you reject him?
Okay. Yeah, I've always, so where I was trying to go with that is like I've always super rejected, like, I don't know how common this is in Orthodoxy, but like Protestants, they just believe that if you don't know the Gospels, it doesn't matter if it wasn't your fault because you were born on Easter Island 600 years ago, you just go to hell and there's nothing you can do about that. I've always found that super fucked up. That was pretty instrumental in my deconstruction. But there's a really terrible contradiction in there, I feel like, which is, you ask these people, so a naturally aborted fetus that just doesn't implant goes to hell. No, because of age of accountability. It's like, okay, so that's cop-out number one. But the other thing, just real quick, the other thing I would say to that is, some of these people also believe in once saved, always saved. And if, as the Bible says, God said he knew you when he formed you or whatever, then you know God, so the child who's no fault of their own dies can automatically inherit heaven. And if once saved, always saved, it doesn't matter if I become an atheist, I'm always saved.
Well, so obviously, like, because I'm Orthodox, I probably reject once saved, always saved, right?
This isn't your position.
But yeah, because once saved, always saved wasn't really a doctrine that actually existed, and this is something you can honestly use in the future. This didn't even exist until the Reformation. The Christians did not affirm that position until way later on, right?
Yeah, like the Ascension of Mary.
And it came from Gnostics, right? That belief specifically came from Gnostics. The belief that basically, like, as soon as you just say, like, oh, Jesus is Lord, boom, like, I can now just go kill a bunch of people, and at least I got Jesus already. Like, that kind of stuff doesn't apply in, like, the actual traditional Christianity. It never was taught that way.
Sure.
Because once they've always said,
these people that say, like, as long as you have faith in what Christ did for you on the cross, then you automatically inherit heaven, because Jesus said something about, like, I can't remember which gospel it is, but Lord, Lord, we did all these works and still you whatever. And he says, get behind me, Satan, I never knew you. And it's supposed to be, you'll know them by their fruits or whatever. So it's like literally faith in death on the cross is the only thing. Like that's what Wes Huff, believe. But this isn't your belief.
You'd say, just honestly, just funny polemic. So you'd say honestly that if salvation was something that applied, if like, let's just say theoretically, right, you became a Christian for some reason, right? Would you say that faith and works makes more sense than faith?
100%. Yeah. Like I was raised Catholic. And so like we don't, they never, and I wasn't like a super serious Catholic because, I was young, right? And then I deconstructed after I went to college. I never like dove headfirst into the catechism like I did with my textbooks, or anything. But I always had that understanding. Nobody in my life ever told me, oh yeah, the Jews that died in the Holocaust, they're all in hell. But then I went to college and I met like Protestant denominations and other Christians who did say that. And I was like, the fuck kind of God do you believe in? I cannot believe that. So maybe we should, I have to pee so bad, but we were talking about logic. And there's actually like my kind of final thing we haven't really got into yet. So we'll just kind of wrap up with that.
Yeah, that's fine. Go ahead.
So this whole thing about like a proposition being true can only make sense if it's in like reference to something and all those kinds of things I argued. So I talked about this with the when I was talking to Jim Bob. If God says 2 + 2, if God's mind is the only thing that exists, and like we have these also coexisting necessary truths like logic or whatever, God says 2 + 2 = 5. You can't say that isn't true, right?
You're the Muslim.
Sorry?
You're the Muslim, right?
Clint Peterson, yeah.
Yeah, you're the Muslim.
Yep.
No, he's not a Muslim.
Oh no, I'm not a Muslim. I'm an atheist.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, I guess I didn't hear you clearly there. Yeah, total atheist.
Say, hey, alhamdulillah, man. Heck yeah.
I don't know.
We'll take your shahada today. You know what I'm saying? But
no idea what he just said.
he thought you were me?
No, you just said some Arabic words. I don't know what they are.
I debate Muslims a lot. I'm sorry. But repeat your question again. I'm sorry.
So God's eternal mind is the only thing that exists. But then there are necessary truths like with logic or whatever. So before God creates the universe or whatever, God has the thought 2 + 2 = 5. Or God has the thought an apple is blue. To me, I think you kind of have to commit to those statements are true, which is, I think that just doesn't make any sense to me. Or perhaps they are completely meaningless statements because they don't reference anything. But then God's not producing truth anymore.
Well, so
until there's creation.
I hate to say this, but it's kind of like a false question in a way, because or kind of like a false statement, because if we're talking about necessary truths, if we're talking about things that are necessary, that are not contingent upon human minds, technically speaking, saying that they could change is incoherent because a necessary truth wouldn't change. So putting up a hypothetical.
But what I'm proposing are contingent truths.
Well, mathematics, so for example, an apple being blue, I mean, sure, like that's fine, but you have to remember that like the spectrum of like light, technically speaking, like I would honestly just go the naturalist view on something like that. You know what I mean? Like saying that an apple is red, that we're talking about the identity of an apple. I'm talking about the identity of a
sure, like right. A better example would be like saying hydrogen is helium. If you change the protons, it's a different element. But there's no such thing as hydrogen. There's no such thing as helium. There's no such thing as protons. So God can make that statement and self-declare it to be true. But I think it actually just means literally nothing. It's the like if he can say that, then he can also do what I did during the debate, which is go. And that statement can't possibly be said to be false. It kind of also can't really be said to be true. I think it's just meaningless.
Well, I mean, honestly, like, because making a proposition, whether or not you're making it in the abstract sense or you're making a proposition that declares a referent that's concrete, like a physical object or something like that, they're very different, right? So there can be a proposition that is true in two senses, or it could be true in one sense in terms of like whether it's true only in abstract or maybe it's true abstractly and it's true concretely, right? So if God, for example, has something in his mind where he would say, like, I'm trying to think of like a specific one. We'll just use the laws of logic, so it's always the easiest one to kind of utilize for this conversation. Because like a lot of the other things are really more just contingent truths that then can be grammatical. Because I did grant to you earlier that there are conditional truths. So like if I'm talking about something like a necessary truth, like for example, logic, I would say that like there's no way that God would ever propose otherwise because it's a necessary truth. Because remember I said that he is omnipotent, but he also works within his own nature. So if he works within his own nature, he wouldn't make a proposition about a necessary truth that then therefore is no longer what is already supposed to be. If it's a necessary truth, God would not propose it another way. If that makes sense. It wouldn't make sense because now it's not a necessary
I sort of see what you're saying when people try to say God can't be all powerful because he can't do like create a rock so heavy you can't lift it.
Yeah.
I actually kind of think that specifically is probably kind of dumb, because I could probably grant that God can't do things that are logically impossible. Because I don't think being all powerful means you can do illogical things, because like we can make like illogical propositions like my shirt is green, but that's not like where was I going with that? That's not really I totally lost my train of thought on that. But I kind of get what you're saying. I think I probably agree with it, but I still don't think I heard like a response to evaluate God making the claim hydrogen is helium, or are you saying that God just wouldn't do that?
I'm just saying that wouldn't be something that he would do, because if there is something if there is something like, that's why I say it's hard to do it's hard when you're talking about physical propositions, right? Because like obviously like if God hasn't created the world yet, then if we're talking about a proposition that's physical, because you'd agree that hydrogen equals helium would be considered a concrete proposition, right? That would be something about something that has matter.
Yeah.
So then like saying God could do that prior to like any form of like creation or something like that, it doesn't really make sense to say that he's making concrete propositions prior to creating anything.
Yeah, but that's just so weird to me, because if God is what creates truth, but he can't even believe in contingent facts until he starts creating things.
No, I'm not saying that he doesn't possess knowledge.
Then he's dependent upon his own creation.
So he still possesses the knowledge of concrete things in abstract prior to creating. That's the thing, is that he has the abstract concept of helium and the abstract concept of what, for example, hydrogen would be prior to creating hydrogen.
I don't agree, because if they don't exist, like literally we have words that have multiple meanings. Like the word set has like way over 100 different definitions, right? So, or have you ever heard, this is actually true, that buffalo actually is a grammatically correct sentence, because buffalo means more than one thing.
Yeah.
So actually, God would be perfectly allowed to say hydrogen is helium, because it's just allowed to invoke that those words mean whatever he says they mean, and so it can just be.
That's kind of the reason why
like a bachelor is unmarried. Like bachelor and unmarried. They mean that. Well, they don't mean the same thing, because a woman can be unmarried too, I guess. But they really basically kind of are. But God can't say that, because there aren't any bachelors, and the institution of marriage has not been created yet. So it's very weird to me to be like, yeah, God can't even believe in true things unless those things have been realized in his creation.
We also would say that God doesn't believe things.
He knows things.
So he knows things.
Well, that's what I meant. But,
okay. Yeah.
Like a belief can be true or false. If it's a true belief, then I guess that's not really saying you know it, but whatever.
But that's kind of the reason why I said that, like, using the example of like hydrogen and helium doesn't really kind of apply to like my argument, because my argument is based off of things that are utilized prior to grammar, like we talked about with logic. And so if something like that did exist in abstract in God's mind, and that's something that is necessary to all contingent beings to be able to utilize, then that would then therefore necessitate that the mind that is arisen or the mind that arises said concept would then therefore be a necessary being.
I probably can't think of anything new to say, and I have to pee so bad.
Yeah, you're good. Appreciate it, man.